Appreciate all y'all coming out tonight and subjecting yourself to this. And hopefully it's something that you will benefit from and enjoy at the same time. I find this research fascinating. I was doing some reading on it this afternoon. Came across some things that, as a matter of fact, I added a couple slides to this after reading a couple of things I saw this afternoon. But before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Becky, would you lead us, please? Yeah. I taught some on this 4 years ago in Adult Vacation Bible School. And some of the people who were in that class are no longer with us, some older people. And I never did know for sure how they took, some of them took it because of some things we're going to talk about. But we live in a different age in which we're learning things that humanity never knew before, particularly in the area of science. And so there's no conflict. There can never be conflict in true science, in pure science, and the Bible. There cannot be. And so for me, looking at this and studying this, God becomes even bigger, more majestic, and more creative as I view Him, as I try to conceptualize Him. And so that's what I want to try to do here. And I want to start you off with a couple of key verses here. He has delegated to man power and control over the earth. And that has extended beyond the earth, as we know in our generation. And so He entrusted that to man. Now, this was unfallen man. When man fell, because he listened to Satan, Satan usurped that delegated authority. But that does not change the fact that God still allows us, having delegated this to us, to learn all kinds of things about His creation and about Him. You see, God is not bashful. He don't try to hide who He is. He wants us to know who He is. He wants us to know how powerful and how loving and how brilliant that He is and how He values us. He don't have anything to hide from us except things that are appropriate in their due time. So He delegated authority, and He also tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. So one of the things that God made sure of, which we'll look at hopefully, was that He placed the earth, our solar system, and us in an area of the Milky Way galaxy where we can see it all. If we were further toward the interior of the Milky Way galaxy, we wouldn't be able to see all these stars and all these heavenly things we see. And what we see, stars that existed billions of years ago, I'm convinced, that no longer exist because the light's just now getting here. And we can look back in time through this technology, and we can see what God has done. But now I want to stop at this point and ask you a question, because this is an area that sometimes people will question you on. I want to ask you. Now, when I asked this question 4 years ago, when I opened this study in the VBS Adult Bible School, nobody to this day has given me an answer. I'll see if y'all do. And the question is, how old is the cosmos? Ken Ham will tell you it's 6,000 years old. It's absurd. It's absurd. You should be ashamed. How old do you think it is? Anybody? Well, I'll tell you that I think it's 13.77 billion years old, because that's what the Big Bang tells us. And there's powerful scientific evidence of the Big Bang. And they can extrapolate back to that time through various things that we'll try to look at here, if y'all stay with me. So, give you some idea here. How long ago? Well, in the beginning, of course, God created the heaven and the earth. He starts out telling us that. It's the first thing He tells us in Genesis 1:1, that in the beginning, He tells us there's a beginning. I mentioned this morning in the teaser that Albert Einstein did not believe that there was a beginning of the universe. As brilliant as he was, he thought it was static, and that it had always been exactly what it is. And it was only in 1933 that we learned that the universe is expanding, and has always been expanding, and is expanding at a faster and faster rate. We also can pretty much guess, based on what we can observe, the observable universe is 93 billion light years across, and I'll get to light years later. You can't fathom that distance. So God created, he tells us in the beginning. So Ken Ham, who I think is, I won't get into that, but I think he's a fraudster. And he says the earth is 6,000 years old, but I kind of take a poke at him here. He's been saying it's 6,000 years old for the last 40 years, so it would have to be 6,040 years old, I guess. Now the second one here is dispensationalism tells us it's 7,000, at least 7,000 years old. Now, as Southern Baptists, as fundamental Southern Baptists, we rely heavily on dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is of man, it is not of God. Let me repeat that. Dispensationalism is that there are 6,000-year periods in the history of God's creation, and there's a seventh one coming, which is the millennial reign. That can't be so. Why? Because we're in the 2,000 years into the church age. That's why I put that up there. It'd have to be at least 7,000 years old, because the church age is 2,000 years old and is still going. Dispensationalism comes from man, not from God. I get in trouble saying that in some places, just like I get in trouble saying that KJV ain't the only way to go in some places. Well, Raymond talked this morning about finding Indian artifacts, pottery, and so on. This is one of the most beautiful things. I'll show you a picture of it. I'll show you a picture of it now. Oh, there it is. Clovis points. Some incredible artwork. They're at least 12,800 to 13,500 years old. And that's not a guess. That's scientific testing. And so what the point I'm making is, and here's another one for you. Tree rings. If you're familiar, it's called dendrochronology. And scientists have been able to look at tree rings, because we know that each year a tree grows a ring. You know that. You can count the rings, get an idea how old the tree is. It has to be exact. It's hard to do. And they can keep matching up overlapping these tree rings. They can go back and find timber that's been, in the ocean or somewhere and survived for hundreds of thousands of years. And they can find those tree rings and they can overlap them and match them. And they have gone back at least 13,951 years with tree rings. That's not a guess. That's tree rings that we have that we can see. So I'm making that point about, and then we go beyond that, and some people might really begin to question these things. The Mesopotamian civilization is believed to have begun at least 16,000 years ago. Mesopotamia, Raymond mentioned it this morning, the Ur of the Chaldees is where Abraham came from and his family. The Mesopotamian civilization, which is one of the better, we have a better preserved record of that civilization. There were others before that. Goes back probably at least 16,000 years. And then we really jump up there. Neanderthals. You're looking at a person who is 2.8% Neanderthal. And not only that, Becky said she thought it was a whole lot more when she saw that. I had my DNA analyzed some years ago, and I'm 2.8% Neanderthal. And I'll tell you something else, all of you are too. I don't know if it's exactly 2.8, it's going to vary, but you all have Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals haven't existed for 150 to 200,000 years. But I have their DNA, and you do too. So there's something to think about. And then we really get out there, it's believed that the dinosaurs were killed 66 million years ago by a great meteorite that struck, of all places, Baja California. They do all kinds of research there and find all kinds of evidence. They can pretty much date it to about that time. And they can also date the fossils of dinosaurs as having ended about that time. So there's some science. And then we go one more. the Cambrian explosion 580 million years ago, and we'll touch on this later, the Cambrian explosion, something to think about here, we'll talk about creation, was the sudden appearance of mammals, every mammal that's been known and been known on the face of the earth. Suddenly appeared, we find it in the fossil record, suddenly appeared about 580 million years ago. Now, whether or not that's when God created animal life, but it's certainly a possibility. And by the way, there's a picture of one of my great-great-great-great-grandpas, I guess, and yours maybe. At least what they think they look like. I've run across a couple of people from time to time that look worse than that. Okay. Well, one of the things that we talk about in dispensationalism is the creative days, the 6 days of creation. And whether that's a 24-hour day or not, I certainly don't believe it's a 24-hour day. The Bible uses day in various ways. A day can be a 24-hour day. A day can be hundreds or thousands of years from a biblical perspective. Because when it's used that way, it simply means that day means a period of time, a set period of time. Now, one other thing, and you see it there, the 24-hour solar day was not created till the 4th day. God didn't even create the 24-hour day until the 4th day of creation. So what happened, transpired before that? And how long did that take? How long did he use? You see, God's in no hurry. Peter said that 1,000 days, a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day with God. God is outside of time. He transcends time and space. He created time. And so he's in no hurry. Everything's present with him. And so for me, as I look at this and study this and learn about this, that's exciting to me. To think that God didn't just go, okay, here's some mud, poof, man. That he came up with some beautiful, elaborate process, which is how God does business. And so we don't know how old the earth was when God created man. It was very old. Before there was life on the earth was probably at least 4 billion years old. But you see, the earth didn't come into existence, according to scientific research, probably until about 8.5 billion years after the creation of the universe. Our sun is a 3rd-generation sun. You know, I stuck my neck out a couple of Sundays ago when I invited people to come to this, and I said, oh, by the way, you might learn some interesting things, such as you're made from stardust. And I thought about that later, and I went, well, I don't know how some folks might have taken that. We're made of stardust, and I'll explain that to you a little later. You know, Carl Sagan, the great astrophysicist, now he was an atheist. And God mostly uses atheists, by the way, to establish his truth in this. Why? Because if all of these were Christian men and women, people would say, well, you're biased. You're making that up to fit, your story. So God uses, the Bible tells us he uses evil men to accomplish his purposes. God uses unbelievers and atheists to prove these things about his creation. And it frustrates them something awful, of course. I'll show you some of them hopefully later too. So the earth was old by our standards when he created man on it. We don't know how long Adam was without Eve. You know, we tend to look at these things because in Genesis all these things are, put together pretty quick, because the purpose of Genesis is to simply say to us, God created, placed man here, man sinned, and then God went to work to save man from his sin. The purpose of Genesis is not to give us biology lessons, but we can find them there when we look. And so we don't know how long Adam was without Eve. You know, when it tells us there that God let Adam name the animals, Adam didn't sit there and go, dog, horse. That's not what it's talking about. Adam was brilliant. He was perfect. And Adam was categorizing and classifying these various animals that God had created and given to him and determining how best to utilize them. It was a very elaborate, detailed process. And Adam was brilliant. He used 100% of his brain. They tell us that, most of the time we don't use 10% of ours. Some of us, maybe less. We'll see. But we don't know how long it was before God said man shouldn't be alone. I'm going to create woman to perfectly complete him. And so how long did man exist in perfection prior to the fall? We have no idea. But I believe it was a very long time, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. One is when God created Adam and Eve and he placed them in Eden together, he said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. He created male and female, and one of their great privileges and responsibilities was to bring children into the world and to populate the world. God wanted to populate his earth with millions and billions of people, which he has because he loves us so and treasures us so. And so he told them to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth long before they sinned. So I'm convinced that they had a huge number of children before the fall. And I'm convinced that when the fall occurred, when they rebelled against God and plunged the human race into sin, that there was a huge population. And there's evidence of that. The old proverbial question, where did Cain get his wife when he was ostracized? He went to the land of Nod, to the east, and he took a wife. There were great civilizations there. I'm convinced there were great civilizations inside Eden and outside Eden. But that's another story. But anyway, we ask these questions. I think man was on the earth a very long time before he sinned. I think that he produced great numbers of people and great cities and great technology. So much of what man knew, ancient man knew, was not stuff he learned, it was what he brought with him from Eden, I think. And one of the examples I always think about is sheepdogs. If you've ever seen a sheepdog work, and it's instinctive. And of course, they train them and teach them how not to attack the sheep and all that. I believe man brought that knowledge from Eden with him as just one tiny example. Okay. So, you know the scriptures there in Genesis 1. In the beginning, we'll break these down. In the beginning, God, he created the heaven and the earth in that order. And the earth was without form and void. The earth didn't exist. It was void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. We know now in the Big Bang Theory that at 300,000 years after the Big Bang, there was nothing but darkness. And the reason there was nothing but darkness was because the matter, the concentration of matter that God had created was so dense that light could not escape it. And so at about 300,000 years, light bursts forth. This is before the stars ignited, a long time before the stars ignited. And then there was another time when suddenly the stars ignited. So in those two occasions, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And he had different purposes. So some people say, now wait a minute. They look at Genesis and they say, wait a minute. How is it that there was light before there were stars and the sun in the creation? Because light began from God's creative action when matter dissipated enough that it could escape. It's believed roughly 300,000 years or so after the Big Bang, after God's creation. We'll get to the Big Bang, hopefully, if y'all don't fire me first. And so, darkness, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Waters there, if you go back and look at the ancient Hebrew word, means matter. Water is matter here. It's not just liquid H2O. It's any matter. And so he moved upon the face of the matter and said, let there be light, and there was light. Two different stages, which we'll look at hopefully here. So, the word created appears more than 30 times in the King James Bible. Of heaven, 13 times, as you see. of earth 11 times and of man 18 times. God says, man that I created. He keeps emphasizing that. He said that he created this for man. When he talked about the earth and the heavens and the beauty of it, he said, I created this for man. So when you go out there and look at the stars and the moon and the constellations at night, on a beautiful, clear, cool night, he created that for you and me. And how beautiful it is. How amazing it is when we look at that. So, the beginning, this is critical here, because I told you that up until very recently, astrophysicists believed that the universe was static, that it never changed, and it was the same as it had always existed. That's in defiance of the Scriptures, because it says, in the beginning, God created. God says in the first verse of Genesis that in the beginning He acted. So there was a beginning. There was a start. And that beginning can mean to start, perform, or undergo the first part of an action or activity. All came about at a very precise place and time. And here's a quote from Stephen Hawking in A Brief History of Time. I read this book in 1988, I think it was, Stephen Hawking's book, the great astrophysicist. He was an atheist. When he wrote his book in 1988, he referenced God several times. But just before he died a couple of years ago, he came to the conclusion that for the cosmos to have begun, there was no need for God. So I hate to think where Stephen Hawking is, despite his incredibly brilliant mind. But he said many people do not like the idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. This is an atheist talking. And he said they don't like to hear about the beginning. And he was talking about the Big Bang, because he said it smacks of divine intervention. Why? Because it disputes a static universe and says there was a point in time when it began, just like the Bible tells us that it was. So, and then it says, in the beginning, it says God. He was at the beginning and long before. He was active at the beginning. He's transcended, as I said. He's outside of time and space dimension of the universe. The Bible tells us that God is a spirit. You remember Moses requested to see God, and God said, look, you can't see me or you'll die. You look upon me as a sinful man and you'll die. And that may have been more than just a physical death. Who knows? So God put him in the cleft of the rock, and he passed by, and after he was gone, he allowed Moses to see his train, where he had been. And Moses' hair and beard turned snow white. Just seeing where God had been, passing by. We can't conceptualize God. But Jesus said, I and my Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, didn't he? It also tells us in 1 John that everything that was created by Jesus, and without him, nothing was created. So the same Jesus who became flesh and man and died on the cross and was resurrected, here he is. He was at the beginning. So the next word is created. In the beginning, God created. There's a lot of information in those few words. Brought something into existence, caused something to happen as a result of one's actions. The Hebrew word is bara, to bring about something from nothing, or ex nihilo in the Latin, which means from nothing. And then in Hebrews 11:3, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. I've told you the story before. I was teaching at the crime lab in Decatur to a bunch of scientists, and I was teaching a course on diversity. And so I had a block in there on religion in the workplace. And I was just dealing with the law, but you know, I'd give them a little something every once in a while. And they got really upset with me. And there was a man there who was the head of the crime lab in Cleveland. As far as I know, he's still there. Smart guy. But he didn't want to hear that. And so he told me, because I trashed evolution, I did it to just get their attention, get them to interact, because they wouldn't interact with me much. And he stood up in the back of the room and he said, I will debate you, sir, on that. He says, as a matter of fact, I'll meet you outside and I'll talk to you about that. And I said, no, sit down. I don't have a chance debating you. Well, when I finished the class and came home, I started getting emails from him. And he wanted to debate. He'd make some point about his belief about evolution. I got tired of it. I couldn't, counter what he was saying. He had a PhD in biology or something. I sent him this verse of Scripture. I've never heard from him again. I hope that it changed his life, that the Holy Spirit moved on him to change his life. But when I sent him that verse right there, I've never heard from that man again. So, and we might even talk a little bit about quantum mechanics, because here's quantum mechanics too right here. Things that we never knew existed until very recently, and it goes against everything we understand about classic physics. That two objects can be matched and be in two places at the same time, tremendous distances apart, and do exactly the same thing at the same time, faster than the speed of light. Quantum mechanics. And so one of the great scientists said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. You know what you're talking about. And here's, if you're familiar with this man, Lee Strobel, The Case for Miracles. He wrote The Case for Christ to begin with. If you've never read anything that Lee Strobel writes, I strongly recommend him. Lee Strobel was a renowned newspaper man in Chicago. He was an atheist. He was married to a Christian woman, and she would witness to him and pray over him, and it infuriated him, even though he loved her, stayed with her. So he decided the way he's going to deal with her was that he was going to research the resurrection and prove to his Christian wife that it was impossible. He got saved in the process. And he's a tremendous witness for Christ now. And his first book was The Case for Christ. And then he's written others. But here's what he said about creatio ex nihilo, meaning creation from nothing. Without a doubt, creatio ex nihilo would be the most extraordinary miracle ever performed, persuasively establishing the existence of God and automatically making every other supernatural intervention that much more plausible. Talking about God's miracles. So I recommend you read him. He's outstanding. And creators create. Michael G. Strauss, by the way, is a Christian, an evangelical Christian, and he said the theistic consequences of having a beginning to the universe are rapidly apparent even to atheists. They hate it. But they work to prove it all the time. And here's Stephen Hawking again. So long as the universe had a beginning, we could suppose it had a creator. Isn't it sad that that man died lost? As far as we know, all indications are he died lost. And that was him. He suffered those physical abnormalities all of his adult life pretty much. Now, this one, and I'll conclude on this one tonight. I grew up with the King James Bible, 1911. To this day, and as a matter of fact, just a little while ago, when I was looking up some scripture, when I want to look it up on Bible Gateway or whatever, I have to find it in the way that it's written in the King James, because that's what I learned, that's what I memorized. And then if I want to look at another translation, I get the verse out of King James and I go to that one. But I have fun picking at people who say, oh, King James is the only way without King James. Well, I won't get into that, but many of these other translations are so much more advanced than King James, based on scientific discovery and so on, archaeological discovery. But one of the things that always fascinates me is the first study Bible that I had that my mother bought me was a 1911 King James translation, and it was an R.I. Scofield edition. Now, if you have a 1911, what did I say, 1911? Yeah, it was a little longer ago than that. Thank you. Something happened in 1911. So. And at 1611, and I lost my train of thought, but thank you there. I like to pick at people, In the movie, A Few Good Men, the line that everybody remembers in A Few Good Men is what, Larry? You can't handle the truth. That's not the one I remember. I remember that one, but the one that stands out for me was where Kiefer Sutherland's character, who was playing the role of a Marine lieutenant, when he was testifying before a military tribunal, and they questioned him on cross-examination about his knowledge of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Marine Corps Code. He was from Tennessee, his character was. And he said, "Sir, every night when I crawl into my bunk," something to that effect, "next to my bunk are two things: the Scofield edition of the King James Bible and my Marine Corps Code." That stuck with me. I never forgot that, because that was me. When I was in the Army especially, that was me. Well, here's what R.I. Scofield said that so many people who are young earthers and KJVers overlook. He said there were three creative acts of God recorded in Genesis 1. Heavens and earth, animal life, and human life. And then look what he says. And it's in your King James Scofield edition of the Bible. There under Genesis, footnote. The first creative act refers to the dateless past and gives scope to all the geologic ages. And it's always amazed me that folks who say, no, the earth is 6,000 years old, and you got to read about it in King James, and this is my Scofield edition, have never read that apparently, or they just dismissed it. So, R.I. Scofield, Cyrus Igerson Scofield, who, by the way, was a Confederate soldier who deserted and went north, said that it was the dateless past that we're talking about. So, I got 2 minutes after 7. Anybody got a question or a comment or a correction? What do you think? Y'all want to hear more next week, or you want to bail out now? Because we ain't got to describing the Big Bang yet. And the Planck epoch, in which they tell us they can go back to the moment before the Big Bang to a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. I have trouble when I think about that sometimes. It's called the Planck epoch. And by the way, Planck was named after a German astrophysicist who was a devout Christian man, by the way. We'll hopefully see him. No questions or comments, huh? What do you think? You think that the earth, or not the earth, but the creation may be 13.77 billion years old? You know, he did these, and I'll touch on this. I talk about the generations of stars. And our sun is a third generation star. All the first and second generation stars are long gone. The first generation stars were massive, super hot stars. They're the ones who lit up the universe. They only produced helium and hydrogen. But when they burned out and collapsed and exploded in great nova, they distributed certain elements, primarily helium and hydrogen, across the universe. And when the second generations of stars came along, they were built off of that, among other things. And when they were gone, they created all the elements, iron and all the other elements on the, pretty much all of them on the table. And then the third generation came along. And so when our Earth was formed, our solar system and the Earth was formed, it was formed from all that residue of those two generations of stars. And so the soil that God created was stardust. And so when He created man from the dust of the earth, it was stardust. And that's what we are. That excites me, to think that made of stardust. And not just mud, Georgia red clay entirely. All right. Anything else? Thank y'all for coming. Appreciate it. Ray, would you dismiss us, please?